So
I'm
excited
on
about
mute.
the topic.
There we are. Hey, everybody. It's Tinderbox Meetup with Michael Becker. I'm Mark Bernstein, the designer of Tinderbox. It's Sunday, August 10th. And quick reminders my new book, Thinking with Tinderbox, is available at the Tinderbox site. And there's going to be an interesting new version of Tinderbox released shortly. I've been writing a little bit about it on the forum. If you don't regularly visit the forum, be sure to drop by. But without further delay, here's Michael Becker.
Hey everybody. So we typically run these meetups by having new people introduce themselves. We know most people. I don't think I know Clemmy. And Jeremy, we know you, but you're not regular to the meetup, so great. Thanks for coming. Haven't seen Keith in ages, but we know him well. Now, typically what we do is go around the room, and if new people want to introduce themselves, they can. We talk about any projects, topics that people have. And if we have a theme, we try to jump right into that. And luckily today we do have a theme. Mr. Bernstein is going to walk us through using Git as a means of doing revision management for Tinderbox files. And he's also going to introduce us to a new view. So with that in mind, Mark, why don't you just take it over? We have time at the
Uh,
end. We can talk about projects.
but I suspect that one reason Jeremy Wagstaff is here in the middle of his night may be a puzzlement.
Okay.
And we
I
we
moved back
we
to the
are
UK a few years ago, Mark.
okay. So
So I'm
so
now in the
not that
countryside
bad.
and in a civilized time zone.
Ah, okay. So are there are there urgent puzzlements, or shall we jump right into it?
Here and jump right in.
Okay, there will be, whoops, there will be time to return to puzzlements later if it turns out. So I'm going to share my screen. I am going to make this big. Great. Uh, but perhaps not that big. Well, we'll see how it goes. Great. Okay. Um,
Hello, everyone. Hope I didn't miss much.
Nope, just started.
nope, just starting. Okay, here we go. That should be big enough for people. Um, get that off there. So, version control is about tools that manage folders, mostly of text files, and record changes to those files. The core idea is that if you have a bunch of text files, for example, the source code for Tinderbox, which I change every day, but the changes are usually much less than changing everything. And so you can change versions by just changing a little bit of information. That is the instructions to get from the old version to the new version instead of selecting the parent folder and saying duplicate or plugging in a hard drive and duplicating your whole disk drive. Uh, it originates back in the 70s with a system developed by Mark Roshkind. So 50 years ago, 50th anniversary, uh, the version control system I'm going to talk about today is a little bit newer. It's only 20 years old. It was created by Linus Torvald of Linux fame in 2005 because he wanted a version control system that uh, would work the way he wanted it to work. And he thought the then current systems were moronic. He then proceeded to turn around and give a famous tech talk at Google, I believe, with several of the developers of the then current systems in the audience calling it moronic. It is built into Mac OS, so you don't need to install anything. It's in very wide use, so there are lots of people who know lots about it. It does have some drawbacks. It is a command line tool. You use it from terminal. Uh, it is full of commands that are cryptic. Its error messages are especially famously cryptic. And it's meant mostly and used mostly by software developers. I'm going to suggest that that's actually short-sighted and writers really need it, but that's the way it's usually perceived. I'm also going to talk a little bit and show you a Macintosh application called Tower. Git-Tower is its website. It's a graphic user interface for Git. It actually is using the very same command line commands that I was talking about before, but it dresses it up with a nice graphic user interface. It's about $60, $70 a year, and Tinderboxers have a 30% off coupon. See the reading list, or it's Tinderbox 30 all caps. And that's good for a while. Not forever, but it's good for a while. So the point of I'm going to try to argue here is that version control systems are actually like keeping a lab notebook for your writing. So you're free to reorganize your notes or to try new approaches in Tinderbox, confident in the knowledge that if it blows up in your face, you can get back to the previous version. And in fact, if it blows up 3 weeks from now and you realize it's been a terrible mistake, you'll still be able to get back to the previous version. Version control can give you confidence, and that makes a big difference. Plus, you can track separate branches of a document, variants. So, for example, suppose I'm working on a proposal for the Acme Corporation, but then Wayne Enterprises calls, and they want a similar but different document. And I want to switch back and forth without mixing up the work. I really don't want to accidentally send something that Wayne paid for to Acme or vice versa. So I've got my report framework, and I want one branch for Acme and another for Wayne. And by the way, that's a Tinderbox poster. The other news this week is the posters for this were composed by an AI called Claude Desktop. Despite the name Claude Desktop, the AI actually is on a big server farm somewhere. But I have been working with extensions to Tinderbox to make it easy for Claude and other AIs to manipulate Tinderbox documents, and with luck, we'll see a little bit of that. But I taught it to make posters because we frequently discussed making posters in the meetup. Took about half an hour, which is about the time it takes in the meetup. And here is the example. This is a Git short originally popularized by GitHub. And what this says is we started out with the main branch. We have the initial commit and the initial version. Then we do some research and we write a bit about methodology. And then we realize we need two branches. So I branch off the Acme version and a separate Wine version. And we make different edits to each of them. And then we get the final results. And I can switch back and forth whenever I feel like switching versions. So the lab notebook that we learn about in school, which actually does go back to Michael Faraday. So it's a fairly recent development. Uh, and the idea is to note down at the time uh, what you were trying to do, why you were trying to do it, uh, in what way it failed, what you saw, and anything that suggests itself about interpretation right away. Now, a step in Git is called a commit. When you have made some changes and they're a small coherent step, you commit those changes into the repository, into the diagram we have here. And every commit is required to have a short message describing it. And so you describe what change was made, why you did it, the purpose you were trying to fulfill, uh, if it didn't work, uh, what parts didn't work, and maybe what you're planning to do next, what you're anticipating. So this is more than backup. You can, of course, keep as many versions of your Tinderbox file on your hard disk as you like. And especially those of us who used Tinderbox back in the bad old days used to have Project 1, Project 2, Project 047, Project 048, and you get to big numbers. Uh, but that's not ideal if only a year from now you're going to have no idea what 047 was. And so you end up using disk space, which is admittedly cheap for stuff that uh, is really write only. Uh, but the lab notebook is a nice thing because it records some idea of how you how you did this, what you were thinking at the time, and you may have a chance to document when you got a good idea. So the idea is for the commits to be small and focused, so that they're a small change that you can explain in a line or two, and that contain one particular piece of improvement, whether it's fixing an action, whether it's adding 5 or 15 notes on some detail, whether it's exploding a note and organizing the children. You doesn't have to be every single step, but it should be small enough that you can concisely describe what you did and why you thought was a good idea. And so the commit history, the list of all your commits in a branch, then becomes a summary of what you've been doing. Now, that's all nice, but another thing we can do is merge two branches together. For example, suppose I've got something like my weblog that a Tinderbox document that generates a static website. And I want to be able to update that whenever I want to write an update, which these days is not as often as I like. But I also would like to do some fairly fierce modernization of the underlying CSS. And that's too much work for one day. So I really expect it to take a month, and it might not work at all, but I'm going to be tinkering with it for a month or so. And meanwhile, I want a version of the document that I can improve and extend, uh, so I can keep on writing my weblog. And then ideally, I'll fold the uh, new technology into the new writing and connect them back together. So on main, I've got various things that I'm writing about as if I hadn't undertaken this project at all. And on this other branch, I've got CSS modernization going on, building off of the state of the weblog at the beginning of the month. And I'll change the style sheets, add functions, whatever I need to do until I'm satisfied that it's all pretty much right. And then I'll fold the new stuff in, take out the old stuff, and we've got an updated site. So you still need backup, uh, but this takes away some of the reasons for excessive backups. You still want backups. Uh, Now, uh, all of the records of all of the changes that Git records and all of the commit messages and all of the branches and all of the things you see in Git are stored as text files, usually very tiny text files, inside a directory, inside the folder in which you're working on this project called .git. By convention, folders whose names begin with a period aren't shown in Finder. So they're hidden away a little bit from accidental deletion and tampering, and but they're just regular files in a regular directory on your local computer. And when you make a backup, say you duplicate the folder, you also get duplicates of all those Git files. And in fact, you can copy all of this to a server out there in uh, a server farm somewhere and use it as a remote repository. So your repository can be on your machine, but you can have a copy of it on another machine. So GitHub, for example, is just a site that will host your open source repository free. GitLab is like that. Beanstalk expects you to pay like $10 a month, but doesn't have any particular open source requirement. A really nice side effect of remote repositories is that you have another disaster recovery piece. Uh, Now that I'm an old guy, I remember people losing term papers and even novels because their disk gave out and they didn't have another copy. When everyone used floppy disks to work from, this happened all the time. Uh, doesn't happen if you've got copies in some remote repository. Even if your computer burns up and melts, the writing is still out there. Okay, this does have a privacy implication. So there is some stuff you don't want in a remote repository, but that's a judgment you have to make. So when you are working on a remote repository, what you do is you check out a copy of the repository, you work on it, you may commit 2 or 3 or 4 times in small steps locally, and then when you are ready, you move the changes back to the remote repository. That's called pushing. Someone else, interestingly, can do this also. You aren't limited to just you working in this repository. So if you have several people working on a document, you can all make changes, commit changes, and they'll all be recorded. as long as you don't both change the same thing in different ways, Git will sort it out. This means even if you are both working in the same Tinderbox document, if I make a file in the Shire and you make a file, a new note in Gondor, then at the end of the day, I commit and then you commit, and we get both new notes. Uh, if, on the other hand, we both edit the same note, changing its text, say, in different ways, what we've got is a conflict. And you have to choose which changes to, and if you have a conflict, you're going to have to decide whose version is the right one, or maybe you'll decide to include one sentence from one version, one sentence from the other. You're going to have to manually resolve conflicts, but most of the time, conflicts are not frequent. Okay, one more detail because you will actually see it. You're working in your working directory, which may be your repository, or it may be a local copy of a repository that's off somewhere else on a server. And now you're ready to commit the changes. But perhaps you now realize that you've changed, say, 10 things. But when you think about it, you've really done two separate things. You, for example, wrote 9 new notes and added 1 new function to a library. That actually feels like it should have been 2 commits, but you've already done it. So what do? If they're in different files, you can say, I want to stage these 9 changes and commit, and then separately stage the 2 changes and then commit. So sometimes, even if you have made multiple changes, you can actually break them up into separate commits. This is less useful within Tinderbox because it's all file-based. But again, if you're working on several Tinderbox files, you may decide that a commit should apply to all of your files, or a commit applies separately to each file. One last thing. Let's suppose you have 2 branches and you do something very clever on one of the branches. And it's so clever you don't want to wait until you can merge them. You want this one improvement, this one change on another branch right now. This is called cherry picking. So here we have the main project. We're doing our regular work. We try a new approach, and then we see, okay, we have a insight. We have a really nice little thing that we want to incorporate into our main work right away. But we don't want to adopt the new approach wholesale because it may not work out. And this doesn't really depend on what went immediately before. I can just grab this. So I can just grab these changes, the particular insight, and say, go take those changes and put these on my branch, and then I continue. Yeah, that's called cherry picking, and it's a nice thing to know about. It's also, I think, an attractive nuisance term. You see the menu choice for cherry picking, and you just want to know where are the cherries. So, as I said, the main Git interface, the one everyone talks about, is on the command line. It's not that bad, but It's a lot of typing and it's somewhat obscure. Tower is quite straightforward and easy to use, if sometimes hard to find. So, for example, I'm going to go and go to my desktop and okay, here's a folder which I've got a couple of experiment documents that I put together for this demo. And if we look at Git experiment, here is the initial So here's the beginning. And then I entered a note, and then I entered 4 notes and colored them. Then I wanted to go home on Wednesday, and I added a second file. And then I made some changes to the first file. So let's go back to here. I can check out this version. So I'm going to check out what I was doing on August 6th. And so now experiment 2 is gone. Experiment. Okay, I've got a note and a second note. Okay, and that's all there is. There isn't any more. I'm going to go back here. Let's go back. And I'm going to and now I've got 2 files. They're of modern vintage. If I look at this one, as you see, there are a few more notes. If I look at this one, we have a few notes that are about places in the Shire. So, risking all sorts of trouble. Nope, that's not good enough. And I asked Claude to make some additional notes. And I give it a hint as to what I would like it to do by saying there's already some notes you made in another chat. So it goes and it asks Tinderbox to, let's see exactly what it is. It's looking for something whose name has the Shire. That's not going to work. Good guess, not helpful. I may not have enough bandwidth to actually do this demo while I'm talking on Zoom. We'll let that sit. So I add a few more notes. I'm going to save. I'm going to go back to Tower. There we are. Here's my working copy. I've made some changes to both. Going to change both of them. And now everything is staged, and I will say commit. Uh, so another two very useful books. One is Julia Evans' How Git Works. It is a 20 odd page comic book about how Git works. And her earlier comic with Katie Seiler Miller called Oh Shit Git, which is a very short 20-page recipe book for what to do when Git gives you confusion and mishap.
Mark, do you have links to those books?
Yes, they are in,
Got it. And you'll share this file with us.
and I'll do that. And I think that dropping this into the chat, if I can, is probably not the worst thing. Okay. Except there's a limit on the length of pastes in chat. Who knew? Okay. So, I have not been able to see the chat, and so I have been just ignoring questions, but surely there will be some.
Are you ready for questions?
Yeah.
So I have a question. What about the public repositories? They're public and they're on public servers, but can you keep them private?
Yes. Uh, the uh, and they're as private as like ISPs are private. They may not actually be private versus various governments, but they're private as private can in practice be. Uh, I think for GitHub, you have to pay something fairly nominal if you don't want it to be publicly visible. GitLab and Beanstalk, uh, you are always paying something, but again, it's like 10 a month or 5 a month, something like that. So you're paying a little bit of rent for a little bit of disk space.
Okay.
And if you're solo uh, and aren't worried about synchronizing among machines, or if Dropbox sorts of synchronization are adequate for you, then you don't really need to worry about remotes at all. Uh, but Git can still be quite useful for being able to keep track of what you've been doing and experiment with different branches.
Cool. Anybody else want to chime in with questions?
So when you have experiment one, demo one, and you have that original document and it's saved on your hard drive as demo one, and you go off and do some other work and come back and you want to add to demo two or demo one, you add two more notes and you decide that this is something you want to track and get, and then you make a commit to Git. but on your hard drive, the document is still demo one now with 3 notes or 4 notes, whatever you've added. And you go on a couple days later and you add notes 5 and 6 and you commit those notes. And then a couple days later, you realize you've made a horrible mistake and you want to go back to uh, the demo one with only 1 or 2 notes. How do you roll back to the original demo one? Does Git do that? Does it enter your text file and subtract all the commits?
Right. When you pull, when you say, I want to grab this older version, uh, what it does is it goes and replaces whatever is in the folder with the old versions. So now it's like Time Machine going backwards, except that it's keeping everything. It knows how to get forward again, too.
So don't have, so you don't want to be doing this with Tinderbox open with that file open. You
That's right.
off.
It won't be terrible because then if Tinderbox saves the file over the old version, you say, oh, well, now Git will say this is another new version. And you can't casually mess up the old versions. You can't, for example, delete the backup, something that used to happen all the time.
So if so now we've made 2 commits or 3 commits. Um, and each commit that saves is just the change in the text file that is the XML file that is Tinderbox. The only thing GitHub is saving is that new material that was added to that original document in that particular commit.
Right. At least that's the logical picture to have. In technically what it's saving is the instructions to get back to the previous version, but it's the same thing.
Yeah, I'm trying to imagine this with non-destructive editing in a photograph on in like Photoshop or something where it saves the changes. It doesn't change the original document. It just changes saves the instructions to make the changes in the relevant layers to recomposite the image. So it's like a sidecar file, but
Yeah. And uh, it certainly works. It works very well, provided the sorts of edits you do in the document are likely to cause localized changes. It does so Tinderbox files, Word files, text files work pretty well. Image files, less so. You might change every pixel in an image with a fairly small edit. You tweak the contrast just a little bit, but every pixel is now different. And so
I
there's nothing much to be saved for deltas.
right. I didn't.
Yeah,
I was just using photo editing or image editing
right.
as an analogy. I would not have considered using Git to save version control in an image. Uh, but it's interesting. So in order to really take advantage of it, you have to kind of have a two when you're working in Tinderbox, then you finish that document, then you need before your work session is done, before your whatever your productivity goal was for for that period, is you finish with Tinderbox, you close that document, and then you go to Git and make a commit of whatever that work was at that point. And I see 2 hands up, and I'm just thinking out loud because I will stop now. You have to you have to stop in Tinderbox, go to Git. So it's not like it's not inline. It's not an inline type process. You're doing each individually separately. It's a context shift.
Yeah, I think that's true. It's not a big shift, but you're going to grab another window. You don't really have to quit Tinderbox, but Mark.
Yes, I just wondered if you come across any writing that explains the problem I observed working in a sort of multidisciplinary group, where Julie had a lecture and everyone talked about Git, and the small number of people who already programmed understood it, um, and virtually no one, everyone understood it intellectually but didn't use it, except people who magically turned out to have a technical friend who basically coached them for a long time. The missing bit, it seems to me, is something that explains this fact. So you open Git, the first thing you do is you make a folder you can't see, and you put the thing you really value in the place you can't see. And it's this sort of thing isn't addressed because it's assumed all the documentation I've seen rather seems you understand why you're doing this. And my observation is most people don't. So it seems to me that for all the power of the Git, which I think we all get, there's still some writing to be done to explain it for someone who is not coming to it from the context of a sort of a programming type challenge.
Can you expand upon what you said, putting something in the folder you can't see?
Yeah, so in Finder, so as Mark was saying, if you have a file or a folder with a dot at the beginning of the name, it
Yep.
is by convention hidden. You can make it visible, but not many people know how to do that.
But
So
you don't deal with that when you're dealing with Git. You don't have to touch that at all. You would be aware of its existence.
well, here's the point, and here is the fundamental point. If you understand that and know that and you're comfortable with it, yes, it makes sense. But what I observed is for most people, if the first step is you take something and you put it where you can't find it, that's kind of scary. And so it's the way what I'm addressing is, or speaking of it, is the way in which it's not a challenge, I think, in explaining this to people who aren't used to a sort of a software type environment.
I work with Git every day professionally, and my experience with doesn't track with that. As I said, you don't have to know anything about .get or any of its subfolders. You put stuff in the folder that you're working on, just like you would anything else. .get is just in the background.
No, I understand that.
Okay.
But that's not the challenge. It's just what I've observed working in a group of, well, in this case, it was a doctoral consortium of about I guess there are about 50 people in the group overall from all sorts of disciplines, and I was, well, actually not surprised that how many people didn't take up this sort of tool when they might reasonably have done so. And my observation was simply that it was this initial thing that they understood the benefits, they sort of understood conceptually how it worked. But when it came to that step of using it, it was quite alien. And just trusting things is something you generally don't do with something, as because going back to what Mark was saying about people losing their work in the early days of floppy disks and things. So what I'm saying doesn't invalidate this at all. What I'm interested in is there seems to be a missing area of writing where people thought, okay, this is useful for more people than just software coders, but we probably want to do a little bit more work in explaining what it means from the perspective of someone who isn't thinking about it as a coding problem, but how to use the system that may make me, be able to document what I'm doing better and lose less stuff. That's just the thought. Thanks.
If I might contribute, Mark, I totally get that problem because I'm friends with someone who's in a writing group. She's maybe 70 years old, and there's a whole group of people at the local library. They're all writers, fiction, nonfiction, and there is no way. I mean, they barely grasp the idea of Git. The concept of a dot file being hidden is eons beyond anything they are ever going to even want to touch. So hiding files, like you said, is a tough sell for people who are non-traditional Git users.
Yeah, there is a tradition of Git for writers, starting, as far as I know, with a book called The Pragmatic Programmer.
Oh,
Back, 10, 15 years ago. that was promoting Git primarily for technical writers. But there again, you have the same problem that you need to be able to ship the manual for version 2 while you're writing the manual for version 3. And it's nice to be able to treat that in some sort of a disciplined way while being able to get back to previous states in case you need to send version 2 to the printer again.
Right. And I have seen more writers, as I think you mentioned earlier, working on their dissertations, right? That those people, especially if they were writing with what's it called? LaTeX, they glom onto this pretty quickly. But the like I said, a group of 70-year-olds who just write, little fiction things. I think this is perfect. I think Git for writers is the best idea ever, and everyone should know about it. But it's very challenging.
So, Mark, I have a question. Can you initiate the commits from Tinderbox, or do you have to do it from like the interface like Tower?
Currently, you have to do it uh, from Tower or from Terminal, or there are other clients too. Uh, there's no reason that couldn't be built into Tinderbox too, but I think there are other things to be done that are more urgent than adding version control to Tinderbox.
Mhm.
And certainly it's taken forever for Xcode to, oh, could you? Yeah, you could use run command. You absolutely positively could use run command.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was
So
thinking.
you could do it from a stamp.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking actually. Okay.
If I could ask a quick question before we go on. Mark, it was about the conflicts and the level at which they occur. I deal with a lot of markdown files, so everything is on a text file basis. And I don't get conflicts very often because I'm just a solo person. But my recollection is that at least with a single .txt file or .md file, I can get resolutions of sorry, let me rephrase that. You can have two people working in the same text file, and I could be working on the first word of the first sentence, and you could be working on the second word of the first sentence, and there'd be no conflict
Right.
at that level because at least with text files, it understands that, and everything just works. So, are you saying is it at the TBX level that you get a problem with conflicts in Tinderbox, or is it at the note level within a TBX file? Where does the conflict occur? Because I know it's not as granular.
Well, let's take about 3 weeks ago, Bruce was talking about um, a summer group where you would have 5 or 6 adults working with a large number of kids and making observations. And it's entirely possible that 2 people would add text to Billy about the extraordinary thing that Billy did today. And they'd write it, even describing the same event. Of course, they're going to use different words, and they're both writing in the same note. So that's going to create a conflict. But what you would see when you use the tool that you use to resolve conflicts is 2 people both wrote useful things, and you'll keep both of them, or you'll rewrite a summary of both things that were written in a third way for greater concision.
So
But that's going to require some human thought to decide what the policy should be.
right. No, but my question is just this. So in a Tinderbox file, if I'm writing in the Timmy note and you're writing in the Timmy note, we're going to get a conflict. But if I'm writing in the Timmy note and you're writing in the Susie note, will there still be a conflict?
No.
Okay, so it's at the note level, not the TBX level.
It might even not be at the note level. If you make Timmy red and I write some text in Timmy, that should be okay.
Got it. And where does this? I'm because Tinderbox is so complex with all the different code windows and the note windows and everything else. Is that still the level?
Yeah, and in fact, if you do a lot of this with multiple editors, you will get used to a lot of very routine conflict resolution. For example, there is a image at the end of the Tinderbox file, which is used for quick look. So, like if you just want to see what the file looked like, you select it in Finder and press, I guess, Command space, just space, and it shows you that image. And like if you have two people working in the same Tinderbox file, that's going to be conflicted, but you don't care which image it shows, so you can just pick either of them. And so that's pretty easy and low tension.
And
One change that is coming up is that Tinderbox currently, as of this date, has a attribute called selection count, which was intended to see uh, which notes you were using most often. And that's been in there for years. No one's ever found a use for it. And that does cause some version control headaches since it modifies a lot of notes just because you selected them. And so that's no longer going to happen automatically as of the next release.
Nice. Thank you very much.
And Mark, I downloaded Tower and I'm playing with it while you're talking. So you're not stuck using one repository, it appears either. You can create multiple repositories and
Yep, you
switch
can have
between
as
them.
many repositories as you like. Uh, a repository on that, a local repository, one on your disk, is just any folder and its descendants.
Got it.
Yeah, Git is genius.
Version control is genius.
Fair
Git
enough.
is damn good.
Yeah, we use, I think when I was working at Safeway that they use, what is it? CMV, VMS, something?
CVS,
Yeah.
SVN.
SVM.
There was a CVS, and then that was replaced by SVN, and then Git took over.
Yeah, I think for good reason.
The March of Progress. Okay, I've got another little thing I'd like to show if we could take a quick look at this. And there we go. Share. And Mark Anderson, particular, pitch in whenever you like. This is a paper that Mark Anderson and Silas Hooper and I have at the upcoming uh, ACM Hypertext Conference about a new Tinderbox view called the Information City. And as you see, it is a Tinderbox view like other views. You select things and they're selected, but it's peculiar in that instead of being a map view, it's a picture of a little city or town or village. Okay. Uh, Andreas Dieberger is a Viennese hypertext researcher and juggler. His dissertation proposed the information city as a visualization. He made mock-ups in HyperCard, and I've been unable to find a picture of the quite nice mock-up to show you, and wrote papers on the subject after he got his doctorate for a number of years. Uh, the core idea is that hypertext visualizations don't have to be boxes and arrows. And so here's a bunch of notes on particular papers. This is this paper, and this is Dieberger's last paper on the subject. Okay, and here's the underlying problem. Tinderbox map view is great, and it's we've worked hard on getting the map view as good as it can be over a considerable number of years, and things like the translucent links and the translucent adornments help a lot. Simple boxes and arrows for something like this are a mess. But even on a big screen like I'm using here, and even with plenty of space and retina resolution, you have trouble getting more than 100 or so notes onto the screen in a way that you can keep track of things. And we all know from just using Tinderbox that there are times you want to have more than 100 or so notes. You also have the problem that overlapping links are a are just a mess. But for non-trivial map views, there is no way to arrange things without having overlapping links. And experiments like force-directed graphs, the dancing maps in Tinderbox, just have not really been as successful as one might have hoped. Uh, there's also just in terms of looking at map view, there's an awful lot of text in there. So we're looking at a lot of text. We're really reading it rather than looking at it, and our rhetoric is full of visualization. But this is more like reading than visualizing. And links are really a pain in the neck. So, we thought it would be interesting, and it was in fact interesting, to take a look at Information City. The view is about 3,500 lines of Objective-C and C++. It took about 4 months in development, and of course that was much faster because we had Tinderbox to piggyback on. I certainly wasn't worried at the outset about what this would be good for. My point of view was Dieberger thought it would be good. It looked cool at the time. We'll find out if it's actually good now that we can do it. Uh, all of us have reservations, and they're all different. So the paper tends to pussyfoot through the reservations by saying we all are unconvinced. I think the personal research workspaces that are you're going to live in for a length of time are actually the most defensible case. And I actually find myself using this of my own free will some of the time. And for example, writing this talk was kind of fun. Uh, might be useful for presentations. I think this is the first time it's ever actually been used in a presentation, but we'll see. Surprises. I thought performance was going to be a perpetual headache, and I was really not sure that especially laptops would not be brought to their knees by the need to move all these bits around. Uh, wrong note. It turns out that performance is not the problem I thought it would be. Uh, I wanted to not label buildings for the same reason that I think there's too much text in map view. But we have to be able to tell them apart and remember which is which. So I've had various ways of having text fly out or hover when we get close to something. Of the most used structures develop personality. You give things color, you give them even small changes like this one has a pediment and kind of funny rounded windows, and this one is square, this one has a flag. On the flag we see is our little excerpt of map view. Uh, but they develop personality, and that's mostly so that you can recognize them. And it's analogous to setting a color or a border on particularly important tinderbox notes in map view, or using badges as they usually are used in outline view. Uh, the buildings don't have to be particularly real or particularly convincing. And in fact, it doesn't have to function as a town. We don't need to worry where the sewers go. Uh, we don't need to worry if there's going to be too much noise in the houses. Uh, it's about, if it's about anything, it's about spatial reasoning. It may just be about mnemonics, in which case you need enough architecture to distinguish buildings from each other. Uh, Even so, there's some interesting ideas here. Uh, Hypertext tends to start from the conviction that information is structured and information itself is linked, that those connections are important and meaningful and are not simply done at our whim. So our visualizations are all projections of some deeply intertwined reality. But there's also a strong tradition in hypertext that's essentially, fundamentally existentialist. Uh, there is always choice. You're always making choices about where to go next, what to read on insufficient grounds. You cannot, in fact, possibly know which link to follow if a hypertext gives you lots of links, because you will only know if that was the right link after you've read it, and perhaps after you've gone back and contemplated what the alternatives were. Uh, so reading consists of choosing the link that you want. Slavery consists of submitting to the situation or the teacher. And so personal sense making makes a lot of sense. Another really interesting effect, and in fact, what referees, the one point the referees seem really to have liked is in a workshop paper, I pointed out that if we look at cities, townscapes, like here I've got the square where I have a bunch of notes that are references for your later use if you're so inclined to find Dieberger's papers and our paper. Uh, but we have a little square here that's kind of, you might call this library square or Dieberger square, with lots of similar looking notes that give the area of the document a distinct identity. And there are some that are different from the others, like the actual PhD dissertation is like the biggest and original work. So it, put out a flag so you can find it. Uh, the other interesting thing is I found myself in this document, but this is only a week old, but in the document I used for testing and note-taking for the paper, that I would make up little stories about what buildings were and how they got to be the way they were as a way to remember which building was which. Like there was a to-do list, which I painted red so it would stand out. And it stayed red even though I eventually moved it to a new place and it stood out anyway. There's the hot dog stand that were the list of things to be read all lived. And I got to imagining the fellow who would stand out trying to get you to buy a hot dog or a new architecture paper. Uh, so there is this very weird sense where the etiology of the town becomes a story. And so I'm going to talk about that in the narrative and hypertext workshop. So certainly reading a document like this for someone else's uh, work is difficult. But then reading someone else's map view is notoriously difficult. It can be done, and but this is a tool that's probably more for thinking than for presentation, but has its moments in presentation too. So that's what's new here. And this is just in another folder. I wanted to get a build of Tinderbox out in time for you, but I didn't quite make it. But there will be a Tinderbox with an experimental information city quite soon. Now, I'm going to try getting unscrambled. I got two Tinderboxes going here. Now, I may not have the bandwidth for this, but and I want to do built-in hints. Good. So I've been working with Claude, uh, Claude Desktop, uh, on using it to control Tinderbox, to read Tinderbox and write Tinderbox and so forth. Uh, this too is coming quite soon. Uh, I have publicly recanted my skepticism about large language models and their utility. You cannot trust them. They are, at least Claude, is lazy and occasionally dishonest, makes stuff up. For example, when I asked it to take a look at Emerson's essay, The American Scholar, it went and got The American Scholar, and it went and got Cliff's Notes first thing. And it went to a term paper mill and got that. This is not the ideal behavior for a research assistant. On the other hand, it is extremely well read and it's got good judgment in recommending books and is in many ways a very impressive research assistant. Now, and I can ask it to do things. Also good at dealing with my typos. Now, it's not fast, but you'll see I've given it permission to do routine things. By default, it's going to ask for permission. Also, by default, Tinderbox turns this off because it's wildly insecure, and you'll need to enable MCP for AI access in a document in order to get Tinderbox talking to Claude. So, in principle, there we have made the container, and daring greatly, so in fact, one of the interesting things about this, notice this is a new chat. Uh, and actually, this is fairly so. This is fairly sophisticated Tinderbox use, and Claude doesn't actually know much or anything about Tinderbox. The trick here, uh, which I am going to rely ultimately on community advice, is in built-in hints. There's now a folder AI, and Claude has its own space, and it has notes called readings. These are things that it's instructed to look at when opening a new Tinderbox document. And one of them is using Tinderbox, a one-page briefing. It's got to be small because the AI still bears a very little brain of stuff that you want to know when using Tinderbox. Okay, like 3 sentences on inheritance. That's all it knows about prototypes, but it was able to assign prototypes. Uh, but and this was enough to have it spend no more than half an hour on posters, and it was writing mermaid posters for me, uh, almost unprompted. I'd say, okay, would this be a good thing to do? And it would say it's a great thing to do, and here's a mermaid poster about it. Uh, the other interesting thing that we have a note section where I instruct Claude it can make notes for its future reference because this this session, this chat won't last forever. Uh, in fact, chats can only be quite brief. Uh, but That way, Claude can make notes to its future self about stuff that we've talked about in a way that is likely to preserve some of its learning. There we are. So this is coming. I find it quite exciting. Not so much for Tinderbox manipulation, though I have done it with ill-defined tasks. For example, finding notes about references to books I want to read in my book Tinderbox, which are sometimes author colon title and sometimes title parent author, and which sometimes have things like call numbers or citation information in their text and sometimes don't. And I actually was able to coach this into summarizing and eventually building a list of all of these and prioritizing some of them while cleaning up the formats. And that's the sort of thing that I can see being quite useful. But it's really surprisingly good. And the trick of giving it readings at the beginning of a session and telling it to uh, but this makes a tremendous difference. So where is my stop share?
And so Mark, real quick, how did you set up the Claude interface? I tried it a bit and I couldn't get it working.
You will need the next version. I'm using uh, the current download backstage build.
Got it.
This won't work on the release build, but I would like to get this into release as soon as possible. And certainly the uh, work on the readings, how to use Tinderbox, what parts of Tinderbox we want to explain to it. Uh, for example, I've been fairly careful about not speaking about the delete operator in the presence of Claude, uh, because there are lots of ways to do things in Tinderbox, and now that delete is in the action language, Claude can technically delete things, and I don't really want it to until I'm a lot more confident.
So have you fed it like your blog and interrogated it on the contents of your blog?
I haven't done it with the blog. I have done it with the book notes, and it was actually quite nice. Uh, Mind you, it's a sycophant. It feels compelled whenever it looks at your notes to tell you how wonderful they are, and it cannot be dissuaded. But uh, I won't say it was tremendously insightful, but it's a little bit, it feels to me like a undergrad research assistant, a good undergrad research assistant.
Could you
It's got shortcomings, but it knows an awful lot.
could you instruct it to create a container, basically be an agent, can create a container and gather all the notes that discuss a book and place them in aliases
Yes,
in the container?
yes, and I've done that, and I sort of did that here. I'm making the notes instead of moving them, but yeah, it does seem to have no problem moving notes and arranging them. Paul Christie.
Hey, Mark, thanks. I've gone into Backstage and downloaded what I think is the latest version, played around with it a little bit. I'm confused about what I see are two different paths to set up this integration. One seems to go through all the terminal actions to launch the MCP itself, and the other just seems to be ticking the box in document settings on a Tinderbox document. Are they equivalent or both required? I'm not sure if I understand.
Uh, I think there's now that you mention it, there's some obsolete stuff on the forum. You should be able to get it set up by enabling MCP in your document, quit everything, open Claude again. And I've got one report that you need to do that twice. But I'll do it twice, and if that doesn't do it, let me know.
Thanks, I'll try that.
A quick one, Mark. On that
Yeah.
note, I was just wondering, so doing the tick the MCP box, does that do all the necessary privacy, permissions, housekeeping for you? Because
Yes.
that's often that's good to know. Yeah.
I believe so. Now, all the necessary permissions is of course, an open question. It's worked on my systems, and it should work. One of the things that does is edits a file in Claude's application support folder that tells it when it opens to open Tinderbox. And the way this works is you quit Tinderbox, open Claude, and Claude opens a copy of Tinderbox. Uh, it's it's a crazy way to work, and I don't like it, but MCP really expects that it owns the process. So we'll see. Peter.
Yeah, I was wondering, could Claude read the man page for a command and then generate a series of Tinderbox stamps to exercise that command for us automatically?
Oh yeah. I haven't done it, but I know Tom Diaz has made stamps, and that's good. And uh, Claude is an absolute wizard at doing things like reading man pages.
Also, is the technology Claude specific, or could you be using Olama
No,
with a different model? And
it's Claude first. I'm having discussions with a guy who has a bridge to Olama, which is the obvious second choice. But anything that supports MCP, which is increasingly most of the AI world, should work with this. But it's been all of 2 weeks from a standing start. The standing start was making a branch from the current Tinderbox release called MCP2. There had been a branch just called MCP, but that blew up. But again, for things like what's the best scholarly article on this question from the last 5 years? Claude really does a great job. And I also find that yeah, I had a notarization problem. It's a really obscure Apple tool that's really horrible and produces completely opaque error messages. And I posted my usual question to on Slack saying, does anyone know how to work this bug? And but that was already 7 at night. And I asked Claude, and it says, oh, sure, I know what to do here. Run this. And it gave me a 2-line piece of absolute gibberish to paste into the terminal. And I looked at it to convince myself that at least it wasn't doing anything harmful. And it proceeded to print out a log that said, oh, the problem is this file with a diacritical mark in its name related to Gaudi view. And something is regularizing the diacritical mark in a different way. I don't know who was at fault, but that was like a good morning's work that it just knew because it has patience for cryptic codes that I do not. But as I said, I'd been very skeptical that these things would actually be useful in their chat/research/reasoning incarnations. And I have changed my mind. There are things you can do.
Mark, it occurs to me, did you resolve the issue? You'd asked me what about you, because I presume as part of the stuff you're doing with Claude, you were saying there was an issue trying to obviously look at information in ATBRef, because if you go via atbref.com, understandably, it was raising a flag that it would basically you being shunted to another domain. If that's still an active thing, because it makes me think that something I've been meaning to do for, well, forever, is to migrate all 10 versions of ATBRef onto, so that essentially this canonical domain is atbref.com, if only to make it a turnkey resource that can be passed around.
Yeah, I don't know. One thing that I have learned is at the time I raised that question, I really wanted it to go read ATBRef, and then it would know how to use Tinderbox. That may not have been a very smart idea, though, because I don't want it to use the tokens, which ultimately are money, or you're limited to a certain amount of work a day. But also, it's only got so much thinking capacity within a conversation. And as it gets close to that limit, the reason it only has that much capacity is its intelligence declines when it has been given too much to think about. And so I'm not sure we wanted to read ATBRef. And my second idea was like make a tiny little cheat sheet. And I actually said, I believe I did this by asking Claude to invent a cheat sheet, and then I corrected its its guesses with the actual syntax because it was sending, it was just making stuff up by analogy with Java and JavaScript, and I think there was some Haskell in there. It was just throwing things at the wall. This is a computer program. It obviously understands all computer. Peter.
Yeah, I was wondering, could you explain how to use the new attribute that lets us set a custom shell for run command?
Okay. This follows on from a question you raised a week or two ago, where when run command always uses the plain old sh shell. And you said, can't I use fish? And I don't see any reason you shouldn't be able to use fish. So in principle, any executable can replace /bin/sh. It's the attribute of on this when run command runs that matters.
Okay, very good. Thanks a lot, Mark.
I think you want to change the default to fish and it'll probably work. I've got no idea where it would get environment variables, but that'll be our next project.
Okay, thanks very much.
Right. Well, we're getting towards the end here. Are there any other questions?
No, that was fantastic, Mark. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, and have a
Sorry, I
great
did
week.
have one question. So the nature of Claude with your Tinderbox project, is it like a one-to-one connection, or is your Claude like once you've logged in, Claude remembers all your interactions with all your Tinderbox files? How exactly can you sort of tweak that?
Currently, Claude assumes that there is one open Tinderbox file. It doesn't know how to open other documents, and it always works with what Tinderbox considers the active document. That will change, but again, I want to take a few precautions against havoc, especially at these early days when I have absolutely no experience. So limiting the scope of what it can do is sometimes a nice thing.
Quick question for Information City. Is there a possibility of adornments?
I'll expand on that a little bit as what an adornment looks like in the Information City.
Well, it might be sort of ground level with some kind of border or color. And then you'd be able to move the buildings essentially to different blocks, as it were.
Yeah.
That would convey some sense of that. And given that adornments can trigger various actions, moving them to an adornment might update the notes that those buildings represent.
Yeah, that's certainly possible. That's an interesting idea. Hasn't come up, and we've had some crazy ideas. Silas has a very good idea that I haven't quite got working to represent lynx as birds flying among buildings. Idealized birds probably on ballistic trajectories, but this gets past link overlap and has some very nice effects. We've also talked about things like ivy on buildings representing how long they've been existed or been in one place. And there are lots of window treatments and door treatments and lights and windows. And so mostly this is because you want different kinds of notes to look different. But certainly ground treatments would be good. And we have discussed read wear in selection wear or read wear in wearing like paths, ruts around the front doors.
Then next thing you know, they'll want minimal lot lines, setbacks, you'll have to get ARC approval.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. Lots of notes.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you.
Oh, Mark, can we have the Tinderbox files from the presentations today?
Yeah, I'll send it to Michael and he can post it with the rest. Is that the best way to do it?
That's the best
Perfect.
way to do it. All right, thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.